Hello and welcome to the 5th session of Coding Mondays. So I'm recording this actually after the session because I had some issues with Zoom during the session and the recording didn't register. With my pathetic attempts to record again, I didn't record the sound, so here I am post-session. Hopefully this will take less time. I'll just go through whatever we went through the session. I'm at an earlier point in my Git history. I'll be explaining what we've done during the session. So just a quick recap of what we were working on. Last session we finished on implementing the calendar page. So I'm going to just quickly demo how that looks like. So as you can see, if we navigate to the calendar page, oh right, this is because the month is March, but if I, for example, create, I have 2 events for February, but I'm displaying only the current month. So let me quickly create another event to work with. Title, session 5. Description. I think it's start time. I hope so. That's going to be a timestamp and it's going to be today. And I also want the duration. Cool. And I think if I refresh, here's my session 5 created just now. So all of the data is being saved to our database and persisted in this grid view, which is cool. This is awesome. But I want to replicate what I've done just now when I'm adding and deleting different events through the database. I should be able to do it through the UI. So today we'll be focusing on adding a modal to display a form. When you fill out that form, you should be able to add a new event to the screen. So we'll start by just adding a plus button and triggering a form, and then we'll go into rendering different fields. During the session, we actually didn't get to interact with Firestore in any way, but just setting up that template is what I'm going to be showing today. Yeah, let's jump straight ahead. So what I want to do is I have my upcoming events, my current month, and what I want to insert here is just a new button. So you'll notice that I'm in VS Code, and this might differ depending on the editor you're using, but usually if I type button in my HTML, it's going to autofill, and like I can even hit tab and it would autofill an element. This doesn't happen here, and during the session I realized that that's because we're still using the JS extension. So I mentioned this during the first session. When you're using React, what you're really writing is JSX. So it's a mix of JavaScript and HTML. So before I do that, I'm going to change the extension. And now if I try to type button, you can see that my IDE recognizes HTML. Now I can autofill the tag and it's much nicer. So all I want here is plus. I do want to style it somehow, so I'm going to say new event, or let's maybe call it create event button. Let's be very specific. And I want an on-click of some sort. And the on-click is just a function, so handle create event click. So this function obviously doesn't exist, so I'm just going to place it at the bottom. And for now, I'm just going to log something. Cool. Okay, I mentioned that I want to style this, so I do want to include a style for this class. So I'm going to put it at the top. Alright, so yeah, we want to style the button and give it some padding and some margin. So I'm going to do that first. Let's do padding of 0.5 rem and margin something smaller. Let's go for 0.25. All right, let's give it a white border as well. Maybe get rid of other styles that are default for buttons, so outline none, and cursor pointer. Let's see how that looks. We'll go from there. Alright, yeah, also background transparent would be good. Cool, nice. So we have a plus button, and that should log our creating event message. And as always, I forget that we should be using class name instead of class. This is important because, as you know, class is a reserved word in JavaScript. All right, that's cool. I'm going to commit that. Add button to toggle modal. Nice. Next step, I want to actually show the modal, and for that, during the session we were using this React modal package, which by the end of the session I was kind of suspicious of, and I didn't really like how it was implemented, but just to replicate what was done in the session, I'll do that. So we want to install React Modal, and while that's running, I'll just show some basic usage. We do want to set an app element for our modal, which will always be shown. This is like, I'll be showing how to set that up. It's going to make more sense. And then you have different functions to trigger different actions on the modal. So open, close, things like that. And then you just have a modal component that you import from React Modal. It has some built-in props that we can provide it. Cool, so this is installed. So if you remember, all of our app is basically this one div, which is ID root. And if I go to index.js, you'll notice that React render, the second parameter of React render, is actually this root element. So React modal, in turn, also uses something similar. So we'll need to set up a specific element for it and bind that element to our modal. So modal is going to be imported from React modal. And my app element is going to be just modal. Then back into index.html, I just want to copy this and call one of them modal, ID modal. This is what the hashtag refers to. So hash modal means that we are targeting the ID specifically. Cool, so now the modal is always bound to this element, which is nice. And what I can do is I can just put the modal somewhere at the bottom. In fact, yeah, I'm going to do this. It's going to complain because I think, yeah, it's not defined. And I'm going to import that from React Modal as well. React Modal. Cool. Okay, I'm just gonna put something in here. Doesn't matter what it is. And we'll see if this modal is being triggered. Obviously, like our handle click, create event click does nothing. So I want to have a piece of state that will determine whether this modal is active or not. And you can see that in the example, they're actually doing the same. So modal is open, set is open, is a piece of state, and the modal is dependent on this. So I'm going to copy this and use this. Whoops. Cool. So the modal is closed by default. I do want to say that is open is going to be bound to modal is open. And I want to have two functions, open modal and close modal. And these are going to be just very, very simple and basic. So open modal is essentially the set is open piece of state that will modify it. And it's going to set it to true. And close modal is going to set it to false. And I need to use the correct notation for this. Cool. So instead of logging stuff, I can actually open my modal. And the modal should take something related to close. So I think it's on request close. We should be doing close modal. So on request close is probably going to be triggered when you click outside of the bounds of the form, and it's going to be automatically closed. So okay, let's see how that looks like. Click our plus button, and we do see a modal. I mean, the text is white. We do have the hello world here actually, but the text is white. And I think if I click outside, the modal will be gone. And that's on request close working. All right, I'm gonna actually try something that I haven't tried during the session, and it's styling the modal in line. If you look into the package, they do have like some custom styles that you can provide in the style property in here. I'm gonna try and use just like the same CSS we were using, and if that doesn't work, I'll resort to this custom styles method. So yeah, I want all of the text inside my modal to be black. I'm gonna go to calendar CSS, put it to the right. Let's say, so the modal is inside my calendar container. So I'm going to try just targeting the tag first and see if that works. So I want color black. Let's refresh. Okay, that didn't work. The text is still white. I'm going to try putting a class on this. So class name event modal. And if this doesn't work, I'll just resort to the other option. Cool, this is great. I mean, kind of. We did get a black text. The modal itself is probably, like, I probably overrode some styles, which isn't ideal. All right, just not to go too deep with it, I'm going to use the same the same approach I was using during the session, just providing custom styles, but I guess you can also target it with CSS. So let's remove this and format this a bit. And I want my model styles object. So if we go, like, this is not clearly not enough, I'm gonna go to the documentation and look up the color that we can use. So during the session, I realized that it's just content background that needs to change. I didn't actually find how to change the text itself, so I just resorted to just changing the background. So we should be able to do content and then background is black. Cool. Okay, we're in a good shape. We have our black modal, which is fine for now. This is good. Let's continue working on the form itself. And I'm gonna commit first. Notice I'm using the gcam alias. This is a git alias that stands for git commit -am, or basically like add all the changes and commit with a message. So trigger form on button click. Cool. All right. So this was like later to the session. I decided to actually render the form itself in the modal. And the way I'm doing that is basically with a basic form. So we have a form element, and what we want is a bunch of inputs, and necessarily like for creating different events, you want title, description, duration, and start time. So I'm going to go with like a proactive approach, because I'm going to have multiple instances of these inputs. I want to have a separate component that I can render and like reuse my HTML in multiple places, and I'll show you how that looks like. This is really like the core of React, reusing your components, extracting stuff in different formats. It's very, very powerful. So the code that I want to write at the end is going to be something like input fields component, and I want to pass it an ID of what the identifier is, which is like title, for example. The name that should be used, oh, I guess that's going to be the same actually. Yeah, the label that should be used for that title, for that input, which is capital title in my case, and the type of input, which is text here. And then I want to create a bunch of them for other inputs. So for example, I want description, capital description, that's going to be a text area. Then duration is going to be a number input. And finally, start time is going to be just a date. I might revisit how this is called, or maybe picking like a date time. We'll see how it turns out. And yeah, finally we want the submit button. Button submit. Create event. Cool, let's implement this component because this is all imaginary code up until now. So I'm going to go to my components folder, so see how I have pages and components. I'm going to create a folder called input field. And I'm going to create the input fields tsx file. Oh, sorry, JSX, not TypeScript, oops. Cool. Okay, so all I want to do is export default input field component, which is a function, just a simple function that will return JSX. Right, so if you're exporting the default, you want to declare it as a function, the variable won't do it. So all I want to do is return let's wrap everything in a div, and then I'll have a label and I'm going to have an input. Yeah. Cool. So I do want to specify something inside the label. I want the break after my label and after my input. All right, so how do we actually pass props? And I've covered this in previous sessions, but I'll show it again. We do want to destructure different props inside the parameters of this function. So we accept ID, we accept title, label, and finally we accept type. So type goes into the input type dynamically. The label goes into the label. Makes sense so far. And the ID is actually going to be both ID for the input and the name. And also there's HTML4 for label, which is going to be ID. So notice how it's called HTML4 and not the usual for property, because for is a reserved keyword. There's a for loop in JavaScript. So in React land, it's HTML4. Just make sure to remember that. All right, let's see how that looks like. Oh, right, we also need to import our input field here. So import input field from, oh hey, that's actually completed automatically. Cool, let's see how that looks like. Hey, look at that. We got title, description, duration, start time, and notice that they have different types. Like this is a date type, we have text. Text area actually didn't render as I expected. Which is interesting. But otherwise this is working properly. So you'll notice that the text is white. I do want to change that. And yeah, this is probably going to be the last thing I do as well, because I don't think we went too far further down in the session. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, maybe do some styling changes and conclude this session for now, and we'll continue next week. So I'm gonna commit this. Create form with inputs. missing a quote here. Ooh, okay, so I think because I added new files, I'll need to do git add explicitly. Cool. Okay, yeah, let's add some styling to this component. So input field, we'll create a CSS file. And a very important thing you need to do, and not to forget to do it, because I did forget this during the session and spent like 15 minutes before Larry pointed this out. You need to import your CSS into your JSX. So make sure you have an import statement. Input field CSS. And what we need to do is basically say that all inputs, their text should be black. All right, let's see if that works. Yep, you can see that it does. We got the black text. We also can get rid of this outline. Outline none. And I mean, same thing as we were doing for that button, cursor pointer. We can even do like background transparent and border, basically this like following the button style. 1px solid white. Something like that. Oh, right, now that it's transparent, we can actually we don't need the color. So yeah, something like that. All right, this pretty much concludes where I got during the session. Just these styling changes. Yeah, make sure you don't forget to import your CSS file. JSX is a useful thing, and as always, like extracting components is nice. All right, well, thanks for joining. I hope next time we'll get to actually implement the creation and submission of the event to the database. Yeah, that'd be the plan for the next session. Let me know what you think, either in the comments or on Discord. I'd love to hear any feedback or questions or inquiries if anything was unclear, and I'll see you around. Thank you for listening.